بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وما خلقت الجن والإنس إلا ليعبدون رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Respected elders and my dear brothers and sisters, I welcome all of you with the Islamic greetings. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May peace, mercy and blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be on all of you. As to what follows, Allah mentions the answer to the most fundamental question of human existence. And that is, why do we exist? What is the purpose of our life? Why did Allah create us and everything? Allah answers this fundamental question in the Quran when He says, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ I have only created jinn and man. There is no other reason for creating them except to worship me. There is no reason for creating them except to worship me. The sole reason for the creation of mankind, the only reason I exist and you exist, is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the manifestation of this worship is the very kalima that we say, La ilaha illallah. There is no God, there is no deity worthy of worship other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is no objective divinity that I will show any worship to other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Very principle, the cornerstone, the building block, the fundamental pillar on which the entire message of Islam is based. No one is to be worshipped other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in fact, that is why we've been created. And if you think about it, my dear brothers and sisters, you will find no goal which is more holy, more noble, more dignified, more sacred than the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Nothing is more dignified than this concept. And if you ask this to the other people who do not believe in Islam, why do you exist? What is the purpose of your life? And you will find no answer which is more dignified and holy than the answer of Islam. I exist in order to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is why I have been created. And so today's talk entitled, A Journey of Worship. I want to ask a fundamental question on the concept of worship and then give an Islamic response to it. Now, why do we worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? What is the reason that we worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How do you ensure that this worship does not become a monotonous set of routines? Now, if someone were to come up to you, an atheist, a Christian, a Hindu, a Buddhist, or even a non-practicing Muslim, and he asks, why do you worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? That's a question posed to you. Why do you stand up and pray? Why do you wake up for Fajr? Why do you fast in the month of Ramadan? What is the primary motivation for your worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? What answer would you give? Think about it. Perhaps some of you would say, I worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because Allah created me and gave me life and health and wealth and family and status and so many other blessings. That is why I worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as an exchange, as a return, as a token of gratitude that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created me. This is one response. Perhaps some of you would say, I worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because I want Jannah. I want to enter the eternal garden of the hereafter. This is yet another response. Perhaps some of you would say, I worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because I don't want Jahannam. I don't want the fire of hell. This is yet the third response. All these responses, while they are correct, at the same time, they are not correct. Yes, and I know what I am telling. If any one of you would respond in these three manners, you would not have done justice to the question. And the response back to you would be, these all are very selfish reasons. You are worshipping Allah because you want Jannah. You are worshipping Allah because you don't want Jahannam. You are worshipping Allah because He created you and gave you so many blessings, so you are giving Him thanks back. These responses might be partially right, I'm not telling these are wrong. These are partially right. But they don't strike to the core issue of why do we worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A true Muslim who understands the Quran and understands Islam will answer to this question with a proper answer. And the proper answer to this question is, I worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is worthy of worship, because He is so magnificent, regardless of whether He created me or not, regardless of whether there is Jannah or Jahannam or not. He is worthy of worship. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the glorious Quran, وَلَهُ الْحَمْدُ فِي الْأُولَى وَالْآخِرَةِ. To Him belongs praise in the beginning and in the end. He is worthy of praise. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also says in the glorious Quran, وَلَهُ الْحَمْدُ فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَفِي الْأَرْضِ. To Him belongs praise in the heavens and in the earth. Everywhere and every place and every time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is worthy of worship. Independent of any other factor, whenever you are, wherever you are, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is worthy of worship. In one beautiful hadith, we learn that the angels constantly worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And from the seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that one night, Aisha radiallahu anha woke up in the middle of the night and looked around, and she couldn't see the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. She got worried, she got scared. What happened? She started moving her hand around until it reached inside her masjid. First, the masjid was connected to the house. And when her hand reached inside the masjid, she felt the foot of the Prophet ﷺ in sajda. When Aisha was sleeping, the Prophet ﷺ is praying tahajjud. And she overheard the Prophet ﷺ say something. Creation of Allah in sajda, in prostration, in the middle of the night, praying tahajjud in the masjid of Medina. What does he say? How exalted are you, O Allah! How exalted are you, O Allah! I cannot do justice in praising you. I cannot worship you the way you deserve to be worshipped. I cannot praise you the way you deserve to be praised. Only you, O Allah, and praise yourself the way you deserve to be praised. Look at these sentiments. Feel the emotions. The angels, the prophets, they are worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because Allah is worthy of worship. Because Allah is so blessed, so holy, so magnificent. Because He is the Rahman and the Rahim. Because He is the Malik and the Quddus. Because He is the Salam and the Mu'min. Because He is the Aziz and the Jabbar. That's why you worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because He is so perfect, so holy, because He is worthy of worship, regardless of whether He created me or not, regardless of whether there is Jannah or Jahannam, regardless of whether He gave us all so many blessings, He is still worthy of worship. So you see, the primary reason is not a selfish one. But when I say, I worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because I want Jannah, it is true, we must worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because we want Jannah. But this is a secondary reason, not the primary reason. And if I say, I worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because He gave me so many blessings, we must worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because He gave us so many blessings. But if, suppose, He wouldn't have given us so many blessings, wouldn't He be worthy of worship? In other words, we only worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because He created us and gave us so many blessings? No, it's not selfish. The worship of Allah is because of Allah, not because of me. It's because of Allah, not because what I want or who am I. No doubt, don't get me wrong here. A secondary, a tertiary reason is yes, we are weak. We are human beings. We need a carrot and a stick, and we need